Hi folks, it's me again, Mr. Lang, and I am here today to talk to you about photosynthesis, and that is how we get to life from light, which is very important. You can look at these beautiful leaves in the background here. They're all photosynthesizing actively. You can also look out my window behind me, and you'll see that there are leaves out there that are photosynthesizing, even though it's kind of cloudy outside. And also you can look at the light cart that you're going to see pretty soon, or maybe you're looking at right now. And there's some photosynthesis going on there as well with some radishes that I planted. Super important that we spend a little time talking about the ins and outs of photosynthesis before we get into the really specific nitty-gritty stuff. So here we go. Um, Very important to look at it as a chemical reaction. And also to look at it from an ecological standpoint. So from the ecological standpoint, we've got two different types of organisms. We have heterotrophs and we have autotrophs. Hetero means different. Auto means self. So we've got heterotrophs and autotrophs. Heterotrophs need to get their energy from some different source, and autotrophs make their energy for themselves. Um, Both of those types of organisms use the same sort of energy. So if you were to look at the equation here, for how we use the energy, both heterotrophs and autotrophs use glucose and oxygen, and they produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. And that ATP is sort of the on-tap energy source that we use to power almost every reaction in our bodies. Without it, you would die almost immediately. So it's really important then that we have autotrophs that can make an energy source that we can use to create that ATP. So real important that we have that glucose or other sugar coming from somewhere, and autotrophs are the source. Also important, when we think about autotrophs, everybody always wants to say, "Oh, it's just plants. It's plants that are making all that oxygen." But really, if you were to look worldwide at the sources of oxygen and energy that are fueling food chains, it's going to be plants, but it's also going to be protists like algae and things like cyanobacteria that are really driving those food chains. Yes, land-based, we've got lots and lots and lots of energy coming from plants, but there's other places as well. So let's not be plantocentric, and let's open our minds. Great. So one really interesting thing about the equation that is right here is this is the equation for cellular respiration. That's what happens in our mitochondria, and we're going to learn about that later. But just the opposite equation is photosynthesis. So if we look here, we've got carbon dioxide and water coming together with energy to form glucose and oxygen. It's really just a reciprocal reaction, and that's an important thing. So this is the reaction that we're calling photosynthesis, and it's the reaction that we're going to spend our first few weeks looking into. We have an experiment coming up very quickly using the radishes that I just showed you in the light table that I planted about a week ago. So I think that's all I want to say about this. I guess we can talk about the idea of exergonic and endergonic real quickly. Here, we are breaking stuff down. Exergonic, we're releasing some energy. So we're taking the energy that has been built up and stored in this molecule, and we're going to use that to do something else. Not necessarily pointing to the CO2, it's pointing to the other side of the equation here as well, same idea. We've got endergonic, we're actually building up, we're storing some energy we're gonna be able to make use of later on. The penguin wants to know where the ATP is in this equation. Well, the ATP is just a form of energy that we use when we're doing chemical reactions. That energy, in this case, is taking the form of light energy that will be converted into chemical energy that is ATP. So really that's the whole idea here. We're going to take solar energy and convert it to chemical energy, and that is what photosynthesis does. We store the energy as glucose, and then we use it. Important to understand some basic chemistry ideas here in the form of redox reactions or oxidation reduction reactions. You probably have had chemistry. If you haven't had chemistry, you have chemistry now, and you're going to come across this. But it's really important just to basically to understand the difference between an oxidation and reduction reaction. So any oxidation or reduction reaction is considered a redox reaction, and basically the idea is that if you've got like compound A and compound B, those could be sodium chloride, they could be NADPH, which we're going to be dealing with, they could be ATP or ADP, whatever. If I have an electron that is associated with compound A and it gets moved to compound B, I have changed where the electron is, and I have reduced compound B. And probably the easiest way to remember whether you're reducing or oxidizing is that, as you should know, I would hope you would know by now, that electrons have a negative charge associated with them. And whenever you add an electron to something, you reduce the overall charge. So we can call that a reduction reaction, which is sort of a handy way to remember that. So, so the other thing that's important to remember is that when you do that, oftentimes you're making some energy available, and that energy can be used for something else, or we can sort of carry that energy somewhere else. So redox reactions are going to be key to us liberating electrons from water, taking those electrons and moving them from one piece of one part of the photosynthesis sequence to another part, and it becomes a very important idea. So we can talk more about that in class as well, but that's the basic gist. If you add an electron to something else, you're reducing it, and that is sort of the basis for how photosynthesis works, and we'll get into that more in the second two videos. Let's see, next I think we've got just an overview of plants and obtaining raw materials. Feel free to pause the video at this point just to sort of look this over, but it's all things that should be relatively familiar to you. So leaves are the solar collectors. You probably knew that. We're going to talk more about how they do that in a moment. There are places in plants where starches and sugars are stored for later use, or that we can consume for our own use. So remember, heterotrophs and autotrophs both go through that whole cellular respiration thing where they use the sugar that is being made and the starches that are being made. But they also have a chance to store them for themselves, and we get to benefit from that. So that's great. Stomates are found generally on the back sides of leaves. We'll talk about those more later as well, but that's where gas exchange happens. That's where the CO2 is coming in. Water is coming in through the roots, and all of the nutrients like the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the potassium and the magnesium and the iron and all the other things that a plant needs are going to come in through the roots, from the ground. So I think that's all we need from that. Within any green part of a plant, you are going to find these things called chloroplasts. And chloroplasts really are the organelle of photosynthesis. That's where we are going to absorb energy from the sun. We're going to split water, and that's going to give us a hydrogen ion and a free electron that's going to get carried through the process to move some energy around. So important to sort of understand the general structure. So we've got an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So we have an intermembrane space in between those two that you can kind of see in the real thing too. And then we have these things called thylakoids that kind of look like green pancakes. And if I have a whole stack of those, I call it a grana. And then the liquid that fills the inner membrane is called the stroma. So we're going to talk more about the things that are here as the second two videos go along. But basically, light's going to hit these things, water's going to get split, and we're going to start building up. We're going to start building up our hydrogen ion gradient, and we'll talk about how that works and why that works as we go along through the second two parts. Pigments of photosynthesis. You've probably heard of chlorophyll before. Chlorophyll is really, really important. It's green. It's what makes plants green, and it is in the thylakoid So it's in those flattened discs. And we're going to talk a lot about exactly what chlorophyll does, but we're going to keep it simple for now, and we'll do that in the later video as well. There's a couple of different kinds of chlorophyll that we'll talk about, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and they absorb and reflect at slightly different wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum, which you probably also talked about in your chemistry class. One of the things that's really interesting is that, for example, chlorophyll A absorbs best in red and blue, so it absorbs those pigments the best and the least in green. So that's why plants are green. It doesn't absorb that green light, it reflects it, and that's why plants appear green to us. It's the same reason why my shirt appears green. It's because the pigments that are in my shirt reflect that green. They don't absorb that green. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So that's just about it for our first photosynthesis intro video. There's two more videos. One is on the light dependent and the other is on the light independent, or the Kelvin cycle. So those are where we're going to get into the nitty gritty. You should take a couple of minutes. You should think about all the things that you just saw. Look at the notes that you took while you were watching, and you should write down questions for me. You can also rewatch the video, and you can try and answer those questions for yourself as well. Sometimes you just miss something because you're writing things down, but then come back to class ready to talk about some more photosynthesis. We'll see you next time.